Somewhere in the North Atlantic, a date that cannot be confirmed, a location that remains classified. Deep beneath the surface, a Soviet submarine has been tracking an American warship for 6 hours. Silent, patient, invisible. On its fire control system, a solution is locked. Torpedo tubes flooded, outer doors open. On the bridge of the USS Harry Yarnell, the captain receives a single transmission from his sonar room. Con, sonar, hostile contact, torpedo in the water. 3 seconds of silence. Then the captain's voice, calm, absolute. All ahead flank, hard to starboard. Launch countermeasures. All hands brace for impact. What happened in the next 4 minutes would never appear in any official record. No press conference, no congressional testimony, no medal ceremony. Because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging how close the Cold War came, again, to becoming something else entirely. This is the story of USS Harry Yarnell, the captain who stood his ground, and the decision that may have saved the world. Background: the Cold War beneath the waves, 0:45 to 4:30. To happen to USS Harry Yarnell, you must first understand the world she sailed in. The Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union was fought on many fronts: ideology, economics, space, intelligence. But perhaps nowhere was it more dangerous and more secret than beneath the surface of the world's oceans. From the late 1940s onward, Soviet and American submarines and surface ships played an endless, deadly game of cat and mouse across every ocean on Earth. They tracked each other, shadowed each other, sometimes collided, sometimes threatened each other with weapons hot. And sometimes, more often than governments on either side have ever fully admitted, they came within seconds of starting World War III. The Soviet Navy of the Cold War era was unlike anything the West had faced before. Under Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, who commanded the Soviet fleet for an astonishing 30 years, it transformed from a coastal defense force into a true blue-water navy, capable of challenging American dominance in every ocean. By the 1960s and 1970s,
Soviet nuclear submarines prowled the Atlantic in numbers that alarmed NATO planners. Echo-class, Victor-class, Alpha-class, boats that could dive deeper, accelerate faster, and in some cases run quieter than anything the U.S. Navy had encountered. Their mission, in the event of war, destroy American carrier strike groups before they could launch aircraft against the Soviet homeland. Track and target American ballistic missile submarines. Sever the Atlantic supply lines that would sustain any European conflict. And in peacetime, probe American defenses. Test response times. Gather intelligence, push boundaries. The Americans pushed back. U.S. Navy surface ships, destroyers, frigates, cruisers, spent months at sea conducting what were officially called anti-submarine warfare operations. In reality, they were hunting Soviet submarines, tracking them, sometimes harassing them, always gathering intelligence. This constant contact between armed forces of nuclear superpowers created an environment of extraordinary danger. There were no referees, no real-time communication between the two governments at sea. Rules of engagement that left enormous discretion to individual commanders. And on both sides, submarines operating under standing orders that, in certain circumstances, authorized the use of weapons. It was the most dangerous game ever played, and USS Harry Yarnell was one of its most accomplished players. The ship, USS Harry Yarnell, 4:30 to 6:30. Narration, USS Harry Yarnell. Hull designation DLG-17. Later reclassified CG-17. She was a Lee-class guided missile frigate, later cruiser, one of the most capable surface combatants of her era. Named for Admiral Harry Yarnell, a visionary naval officer who had predicted the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor a decade before it happened, in a 1932 war game that the Navy's leadership chose to ignore. The ship that bore his name would prove equally prescient, operating in dangerous waters, making decisions that history might not record, but that history would certainly feel. At 547 feet long, displacing 8,200 tons fully loaded, Harry Yarnell was a formidable vessel. Twin propeller shafts driven by steam turbines gave her a top speed exceeding 30 knots. Her weapons suite reflected the anxieties of her era. Terrier, surface-to-air missiles for fleet defense, ASROC anti-submarine rockets, Mark 32 torpedo tubes, and a comprehensive sensor suite that made her among the most capable anti-submarine warfare platforms afloat. Her combat information center, the nerve center of the ship buried deep in the hull, was a world of green glowing screens, sonar operators wearing headphones pressed tight against their ears, and officers making rapid calculations about contacts that might be whales, might be Soviet submarines, or might be both. She deployed repeatedly throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the most dangerous decades of Cold War naval confrontation. Mediterranean cruises, North Atlantic patrols, carrier escort duty in waters where Soviet submarines were known to operate in force. She had seen things, done things that remain classified. The crew that served aboard Harry Yarnell were professionals of the highest order. Sonar operators who could identify a Soviet submarine class by the acoustic signature of its propeller. Anti-submarine warfare officers who had spent careers studying Soviet tactics. A captain who had commanded at sea long enough to understand that the decisions he made on his bridge were not theoretical exercises. They were real, and they had consequences. The Hunt, Cat and Mouse in the North Atlantic. Narration. The mission had begun as routine, if anything in Cold War naval operations could be called routine. USS Harry Yarnell was operating in the North Atlantic, conducting anti-submarine warfare patrols in waters that NATO intelligence identified as a primary Soviet submarine operating area. The mission? Detect, track, and if necessary, respond to Soviet submarine activity, threatening American and Allied interests. The sonar conditions were challenging. The North Atlantic is an acoustic nightmare. Thermal layers that bend and scatter sound, biological noise from marine life, the constant background roar of shipping lanes. Finding a submarine that didn't want to be found was as much art as science. Harry Yarnell's sonar team was among the best afloat. The contact came first as a whisper, a faint tonal signature buried in background noise. A sonar operator, young, experienced beyond his years, headphones clamped against his ears in concentration, heard something that wasn't the ocean, something mechanical, regular, deliberate, Soviet. The contact was classified quickly. Victor-class nuclear attack submarine, one of the Soviet Navy's most capable hunters. Fast, capable of 30 knots submerged, armed with torpedoes and cruise missiles, and crewed by professionals who were as skilled in their domain as Harry Yarnell's crew was in theirs.
The tactical picture developed rapidly. The Soviet submarine was operating at depth, conducting what appeared to be a standard patrol, but oriented in a way that suggested awareness of Harry Yarnell's presence. The cat knew the mouse was watching. The mouse knew the cat was there. This was the essence of Cold War naval confrontation. Two highly trained forces, operating with weapons ready, aware of each other's presence, neither willing to back down, neither wanting to start a war. For hours the dance continued. Harry Yarnell adjusted course, using her ASROC capability and onboard helicopters to maintain contact with the Soviet boat. The Victor maneuvered, dived deeper, attempted to break contact. Neither succeeded in its primary objective. Then the tactical picture changed. The Soviet submarine altered its behavior. Maneuvers that had been evasive became something else. The boat turned, began an approach. In the sonar room, the operator's voice remained professionally calm, even as his hands tightened on his console. "Con, sonar. Contact is turning toward. Assessing possible targeting maneuver." On the bridge, the captain absorbed this information without visible reaction. A targeting maneuver meant one thing. The Soviet submarine was positioning itself for a firing solution. It might be a probe, aggressive harassment designed to test American nerve. It might be a demonstration of capability, or it might be the real thing. The captain had no way to know, and he had very little time to decide. The moment, torpedoes. What happened next is drawn from the accounts of those who were there, men who carried the memory of it for decades before classification restrictions allowed any of it to be discussed. The Soviet submarine had achieved firing position. In the sonar room, the operator picked up a sound that every anti-submarine warfare sailor trained for and hoped never to hear in earnest. High-pressure air being forced into torpedo tubes, the distinctive acoustic signature of tube flooding, outer doors opening. Con, sonar, possible torpedo tube transients. Contact may be preparing to fire. The captain looked at his executive officer. A moment of communication that required no words. He picked up the 1MC, the ship-wide intercom. General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. Throughout the ship, the sound of running feet, watertight doors slamming, the organized chaos of a crew that had drilled for this moment hundreds of times, now doing it for real. The captain's options were limited, and all of them were terrible. He could attempt to break contact, accelerate, maneuver, create distance. But a Victor class at full speed could match him, and running might be interpreted as weakness, or worse, might remove him from position to respond. He could attempt to contact the submarine via underwater telephone, the Gertrude system, a move that acknowledged the tactical situation while opening dialogue. But the Soviets had shown no interest in dialogue. He could attack first. His ASROC rockets could be in the water within minutes, delivering a homing torpedo above the Soviet boat. Under his rules of engagement, a submarine that had achieved a firing solution and flooded its tubes could arguably be considered a hostile act. But firing first on a Soviet warship in international waters, even in self-defense, had consequences that extended far beyond this patch of North Atlantic. Consequences measured in missiles, not torpedoes. Consequences that could end civilization. Then the sonar operator's voice again, stripped of all professional detachment. Con, sonar, torpedo in the water, torpedo in the water, bearing 270, closing. The captain had practiced this moment in simulators, had read the accounts of those who'd faced it in actual war, had thought about what he would do. Now he found out if his thinking had been right. All ahead flank, hard to starboard, launch countermeasures. The ship heeled violently as her rudder went hard over. Thousands of tons of steel turning as fast as physics allowed. Engineers below decks pushing the steam plant to its limits, the hull shuddering with the demand. Countermeasures deployed, noisemakers and decoys designed to seduce the torpedo's acoustic homing system away from the ship's hull. In the Combat Information Center, officers tracked the torpedo's bearing on their displays. Sonar called updates with the precision of men who understood that each word might be their last. Torpedo bearing 268, torpedo bearing 265. Closing rate appears to be changing. The captain stood at his bridge windows. He did not grip the railing. He did not raise his voice. He watched. Torpedo bearing 260, bearing drift to the left. Torpedo appears to be homing on countermeasures. 45 seconds of silence that felt like 45 years. Torpedo has passed aft. No detonation. Torpedo is running out. In the Combat Information Center, someone exhaled audibly. Someone else said something that is not repeatable in polite company. The captain keyed his intercom. "Sonar, Captain, where is the contact?" Contact is turning away, Captain, running deep, running fast." The Soviet submarine was leaving. Whether the torpedo had been fired as a genuine attack, a warning shot, a gross miscalculation, or a deliberate probe of American nerve, no one on Harry Yarnell could know. What they knew was this: they were alive. Their ship was intact. And something extraordinary had just happened in international waters that the world would never officially hear about. The captain turned to his executive officer. "Get damage control to check the hull. Then get me a secure channel to fleet." He paused. "And get the crew a hot meal. They've earned it." The silence, why the world never knew. In the days that followed, USS Harry Yarnell completed her patrol and returned to port. There was no press conference, no official statement, no acknowledgement from the U.S. Navy, the Department of Defense, or the White House that anything unusual had occurred in the North Atlantic. The classified after-action report went up the chain of command and into a vault. The crew was debriefed and reminded of their security obligations. The incident joined dozens of similar events in the growing and deeply classified archive of Cold War naval confrontations. Why the silence? The answer reveals something profound about how nuclear superpowers managed their dangerous relationship. Acknowledging a Soviet torpedo attack on an American warship would have created irresistible pressure for retaliation. The American public, confronted with evidence that the Soviets had fired on their Navy, would have demanded response. Congress would have demanded response. The military would have planned response. And response, any response, risked escalation along a ladder that had nuclear weapons at the top. Both governments understood this. Both governments, whatever their differences, shared one fundamental interest: survival. So incidents were buried. Captains were silenced. Records were classified for decades. And the Cold War's most dangerous moments, the ones that came closest to becoming something catastrophic, were hidden from the people whose lives depended on them remaining hidden. This wasn't conspiracy. It was crisis management at the highest level. The 1972 Incidents at Sea Agreement between the U.S. and Soviet Union, negotiated partly because of exactly these kinds of dangerous encounters, created some basic protocols for naval interactions. No simulated attacks on each other's ships. No interfering with naval formations. Basic communication procedures. But the agreement had limits, and submarines operating deep, far from any oversight, remained the most dangerous wildcards in the Cold War deck. The captain of USS Harry Yarnell understood all of this. His decision to maneuver rather than escalate, to defend his ship without triggering the wider war that retaliation might have caused, was not weakness. It was the most difficult kind of courage. The courage to absorb an attack and choose the harder path of de-escalation. He never received a medal for it. His name was never in the newspapers, but on the day it mattered most, he made exactly the right call. Aftermath: the Cold Wars. The USS Harry Yarnell incident, whatever its precise nature, was not unique. Declassified records and the accounts of veterans reveal a Cold War naval history far more violent and dangerous than the public ever knew. In 1968, the USS Scorpion, a nuclear attack submarine, was lost in the Atlantic with all 99 crew members. The official cause, never definitively established. Some naval analysts have suggested Soviet involvement. The truth may never be fully known. In 1970, the Soviet submarine K-8 sank in the Bay of Biscay, killing 52 crew members. In 1974, USS Kitty Hawk, an American aircraft carrier, the sailors who served aboard her carried their experiences quietly. Some have spoken, in their final years, of what they saw and did in the North Atlantic, of contacts that made their sonar operators go pale, of moments when General Quarters was called for reasons that appeared in no official log, of a captain who stood on his bridge while a torpedo ran for his ship and who made the right decision when it mattered most. History doesn't always record its most important moments. Sometimes it buries them. But they happened, and the men who were there knew. Conclusion: the captains who held the line, 1830 to 2000. There is a kind of courage that history rarely celebrates. Not the courage of the charge, the assault, the dramatic last stand. Not the courage that fills monuments and textbooks and movies. The courage of restraint. The courage to absorb a blow and choose not to strike back, when striking back might feel justified, but would make everything worse. The courage to protect your crew, defend your ship, and still make the decision that prevents catastrophe. The captain of USS Harry Yarnell exemplified this courage on a day that the world never knew about. He did what naval officers are trained to do. He assessed his situation, he protected his command, and he made a decision in seconds that would have taken committees weeks to reach. And then he said nothing about it. For decades. This is the hidden history of the Cold War. Not just missiles and summits and proxy conflicts in distant nations, but sailors in dark water, making decisions under pressures that most human beings will never understand, and getting it right, again and again, in incidents that remain secret precisely because they went right. When the Cold War ended without nuclear exchange, when the Soviet Union dissolved peacefully and the world exhaled after 40 years of existential tension, the credit went to politicians and diplomats and strategic theorists. Some of it belongs to the captains, the ones who stood on their bridges in the North Atlantic and the Pacific and the Mediterranean and the Arctic, who received reports of torpedo launches and hostile maneuvers and chose, every time, the response that kept the peace. We don't know all their names. We don't know all their ships. We may never know all the moments when they held the line. But they held it. And we are here because they did. Subscribe for more Cold War history and naval documentaries.